Welcome back to another episode of Grow Your Tutoring Business. Today, you're going to meet Jane Bilham, who is an expert teacher, an outstanding teacher who left teaching maybe in a different circumstance to most of us. She actually left on really good terms. She absolutely loves teaching, and her passion for teaching actually shines throughout the podcast. She's going to share with you the importance of having a mentor, the importance of developing trust and developing a meaningful relationship. She shares the reason she left teaching, and it's really centered around being a family-orientated person. Jane has also managed to grow her tutoring business into a place where she tutors children from overseas. She shares an insight into this with us today. Get your notepads ready and enjoy. Welcome back to another episode. We've got the amazing Jane Bilham with us today. Now, I'm excited to share this with everybody because myself and Jane we've spoken quite a bit in the past and spent some time to sort of chatting in general about tutoring and what the next stages would be, because we are at very similar stages in where our businesses are at, and which is really exciting. But you've also got something different, and I think what we've got is set different strengths and different perspectives on the tutoring world. But what I'm going to do is, rather than me explain it, I'm just going to hand over to you, Jane. And welcome. Thank you for giving up some time for everybody, and I know there's going to be a lot of value in this today, so welcome.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real privilege to speak. I am Northern, so I don't like to talk about myself very often, but I do like talking. So I'm hoping I'll be able to give some value to everybody that's listening.
Well, we were just saying, Jane, I was just saying that I'm from the South. I'm deep South. So we don't speak to anybody down here. We walk down the street, no one even says hello to one another. And I always love traveling up north because, I mean, usually stay in a travel lodge or something up there. If I go up, usually for football purposes, you walk down the street and everyone's just saying hello. You like you've known them all your life. So you might not like talking about yourself, but I bet we actually talk quite a bit tonight. So I'm looking forward to it.
So I've really enjoyed being in your group, and I know that I've interacted with quite a few people there. I know that a lot of people know about my tuition journey, but Richard's asked me this evening to talk about kind of where it all began for me, and it does all link together. It may not seem so as I'm going through, but there is kind of a real focus on my passion for learning and teaching. I've always kind of passionately advocated that excellent learning and teaching needs to underpin everything that we do. And that's been a focus throughout my teaching career, but also throughout my tuition as well. I qualified as a teacher 18 years ago, which is horrendous because it makes me realise how old I actually am. And from the very first moment I stepped in the classroom, I felt like I'd arrived. I will be honest, I initially got into teaching because the government at the time was offering a golden hello and an offer to pay off my student loan. But once I entered that classroom, I belonged. I absolutely loved it. And I had the absolute honour of training at some very, very innovative schools with some inspirational mentors, but also a real variety of secondary schools. I'm a secondary English teacher. Now, after my training, where I did my PGCE, I began a job in an outstanding secondary school. And I was fortunate enough to be in a really innovative place. They were really kind of leading edge school, brilliant CPD. And this did really lay the foundation for me to have the focus and space to really focus on like crafting my teaching skills and having a real focus on learning. The kids were amazing there. The results were excellent. But I knew from my placement during my PGCE that I had a place in challenging schools. So I shocked everybody at that school. And after 2 years, I left the comfort of a really high achieving, outstanding school to work in a national challenge school that was yo-yoing in and out of special measures.
Okay.
And I loved it there. Now, it seems quite counterintuitive to go somewhere like that to develop your teaching, but it is absolutely true. I read somewhere quite recently that 1 year in a challenging school can be worth 5 in a coasting one. And that was certainly the case for me. I learned so much at that school, and I worked there for between 3 and 4 years. So I don't know how much experience that actually exposed me to. I don't know if you've ever worked in a school like that, Richard, or anybody listening has, but the camaraderie among staff is like nowhere else.
Jane, that I did, but it was the school which ended up really ending my career because it was cliquey.
Gosh. Right. Okay.
But I say that on the back of, I know a really good friend of mine who explains it in exactly the same way you described there. She was in a school that's in special measures, and she came in as a newly qualified teacher, and she just said the camaraderie with everybody and the team spirit, it set the foundations for her teaching career.
Yes, yeah. And they did become like my family. I mean, I've got my best friend worked there. She was bridesmaid at my wedding. And one of them actually did become my family because he became my husband. So I had the luck of falling in with an absolutely amazing department. And that really set me up for my future. I worked with a second in department who had experience in the independent sector. Her husband worked at the local boarding school, so she exposed us to that sector. She was an amazing teacher, had worked in a vast array of different schools because she travelled according to her husband's job and placement. I worked with a chief examiner for English literature, A-level, who was the most inspirational person I have ever met. It was just ongoing day-to-day CPD in an incredibly casual way. He was Scouse, so his banter was just top-notch. But it wasn't just golden nuggets that he gave you. It was platinum nuggets on a daily basis. It was, what do actual assessment objectives mean? How do you teach them to students who are disengaged? How are specifications developed? And how do you convey your passion for quite a classical subject to students that have essentially given up on themselves? It was 3-4 years of amazing CPD from that team. My head of department was the most formidable woman I have ever met in my life. She showed me the importance of being a leader. She gave me opportunities to develop, and she used to call me her kind of protege. Grasshopper, she used to call me, from a film that I had no cultural reference to, but she used to call me her grasshopper. She used to get me involved with meetings with the SIP. She taught me when to fight your corner and when to nod and smile. She dragged me into the gladiator pit that was the maths and English meetings, where you had to kind of fight over which students were going to achieve in maths and English together on your kind of war board. And amongst all of this, you were facing HMI on a regular basis. Now, you can't be in a school like that without having to have a sharp focus on excellent learning and teaching all of the time to survive. And that instilled the importance of this kind of strategy of excellent learning and teaching has to underpin everything. Personally, for me, I felt like I found my calling in grinding out results for kids that had given up on themselves and dragging them kicking and screaming, whether they liked it or not, to achieve their target grade or higher. Because from a personal experience, I had a real kind of personal experience of the transformative effects of education. I'm from a mining village in Northumberland, and education for me was my pass out of that bubble. And I was really passionate about that. Now, you can't do any of those things. You can be the best teacher in the world, but if you don't have the ability to form meaningful relationships with students, then you can't survive in a school like that. You have to know when is the right time to, you know, have a friendly conversation or have a stern word with somebody. And it really kind of had driven home the belief for me. And this was told to me in my first school when I was an NQT. Jane, you need to remember that you teach kids. You don't teach English, you teach kids or students, if we're being politically correct now. So he really, just this idea of forming meaningful relationships with students and marrying that with a real focus on learning and teaching above all else, that kind of shaped me as a teacher. This idea of, you know, being quite results focused. We weren't a factory, but we also had to survive because we were a national challenge school. You know, we were under an awful lot of scrutiny, but we also knew that by getting these children the results, we were ultimately going to change their life. And that is a really powerful thing as a teacher. Now, I'm also quite aware that all of this was happening in my 20s. So for that season of my life, I was able to do that and I lived and breathed it. Now, if I'd been doing that now, I don't think I could do, you know, I could form the role in the same way. But for that point in my career, it did really shape me. And then I was thrown out of the nest because it was time for me to have my own team. And I was encouraged, you know, I was given an awful lot of opportunity there. But when the time came, I respected my colleagues so much, and my head of department and all of my other colleagues. And they just said, you know, Jane, it's time. You're ready. And I owe an awful lot to them. I'm still in touch with them. I mean, I basically had my head of department on speed dial when I had my own team. And it was like, what would Chris do on a daily basis? Just so that kind of relationship continued. But I did move on, and I was appointed as Director of Communications to a very large faculty. I line managed 15 people. I wouldn't have been able to do that with any success if I hadn't had that experience in a challenging school. And I think sometimes there can be a snobbery around working in a challenging school. But for me, it made me a better teacher, like 100%. I owe my whole kind of career to that period of teaching in that school. I wouldn't have been able to do it without them. And again, I fell on my feet, had amazing mentors there. My line manager was optimum and kind of forcing me to kind of create opportunities for me and making sure that I went for them. My predecessor also created opportunities for me because she'd been promoted, which is how the role had become available. And within months, they had flown me to Chicago for a CPD conference, the ASCD, and I was delivering kind of inset for the local authority.
In Chicago?
Yeah, it was absolutely bonkers. So amazing experiences available. They kind of, you know, this conference was kind of a national American conference, and then we came back to Northampton and kind of disseminated the information to the whole borough, basically. And that was the level of trust that they had in me, and the opportunities that were provided for me. They encouraged me to become an SLE, so subject leader in education, where I led on kind of helping others in the Academy Trust in challenging schools to develop other leaders and helping them to kind of maybe reform their departments. Ofsted still stalked me, even though I left the special measures school. But this time it was to work with my predecessor, because they'd asked us to feature in an HMI case study called Excellence in English. So they basically chose 10 schools nationally and kind of came to see examples of best practice. So I had the pleasure of being involved in that, and that opened doors for me. It led to me kind of presenting to a national conference for the SSAT, leading an outstanding English department, which was a brilliant experience. And then that kind of led to me being promoted to an assistant vice principal. And I worked more closely with an absolutely inspirational leader who again mentored me, and we led on learning and teaching across the whole school. And that ultimately resulted in the school being awarded an outstanding category. And learning and teaching was noted as a particular success there. Now, that list over a period of 3 to 4 years makes me sound like a careerist. And that isn't the case. Well, I never really sought out these opportunities. Yes, I'm very driven, but I owe a lot to the mentors and colleagues that supported me to further my experience. I never put myself forward for anything. The opportunities were presented and I took them. And for that season of my life, it was perfect. I was in my late 20s, loved the job, lived and breathed it, really bought into this idea that you devote your life to public service, that you devote everything that you have. I didn't mind working weekends. I didn't mind working evenings because this was me. I was doing it. I was really kind of at the pinnacle of my career. And then I had my son and everything changed. Because ultimately I knew that I couldn't be the mother that I wanted to be and be the teacher that I wanted to be. And I am a complete feminist, but I did decide to resign, and that shocked everybody. I just knew I've always given everything 100%. And at that point in my life, I knew I would be miserable because I couldn't justify being in meetings till 7, 8 o'clock at night and being a mum. I couldn't, that just didn't fit right for me. And it might be different for lots of, I know that it's different for a lot of people because of people that I work with and who I respect enormously. But for me, that wasn't my choice. So I think we spoke about this earlier, that I didn't leave my career jaded. I left on a real high. And this has created some barriers for me to work through. Recently, I think I've kind of come to terms with that because I was faced with the seismic shift of having a baby, and nothing is like motherhood to compared to taking a sledgehammer to your confidence. Nothing can compare to that. I can silence bottom set year 9 with the raise of an eyebrow, but I can't get my 2-year-old to put on a pair of shoes. I relocated back to the Northeast. So I lost that whole sense of myself. I didn't have any contacts because all my contacts were down in Northamptonshire. Nobody knew my reputation. I was just a mum at a baby group. I had no job. I was going to baby massage instead of SLT meetings. I had no team. I had none of that external validation that I'd had in my career. And I knew that this was the right thing for me. And it was a real privilege to be able to look after your children and to stay home. But I think, this has kind of affected my tuition journey in a lot of ways. And I think it's only recently in the last kind of 6 to 12 months that I've processed all of that. A lot of it thanks to your group actually, and Sharon Corley, and the kind of posts that you put in there on quite a regular basis, which I will get to. And I knew that this was the right thing for me to do, but there was that sense of loss there. I'd even lost my name because I taught in my maiden name, and I'd since been married, so nobody ever called me Miss Phillipson ever again when I walked out of there. And that is quite a big thing, that kind of caricature that you present and you become. And in the interim, I did some consulting for my old school, but obviously that's not sustainable because travelling from the Northeast down to Northamptonshire, that's not a sustainable avenue. I examined for literally every exam board that ever existed because I wanted to keep my hand in. I was convinced that it's fine, like I'll get through this and I'll just walk into another SLT job if I ever want to. I've got this CV. But as time eked on, I kind of knew that probably wasn't realistic. So I began tutoring, and I was in a very fortunate position that there was no financial need for me to do that. And I'm very aware that that is a very privileged position to be in. The money was for me. And it was so much more than money for me, because for those hours, I was Miss Phillipson again. I got results. I could do it. My students got excellent results, and I was getting that validation and getting that self-confidence back. Now, I probably only had about 5 students maximum at this time. I didn't even realise that tutoring was a possible option for me. I always had in the back of my mind, at some point, I will have to go back to teaching. At some point, there will be a moment where I go back. But that was becoming less and less attractive, because I loved the life that we'd created. We've got a house by the sea now. I spent all day with my kids. And yes, that can be hard, but you never get that time back. And for me, it was a really positive experience. Someone got in touch with me the other day and kind of was asking how in the early days when your children were young, how did you manage childcare? And it just reminded me that my mum, I used to tutor in the local library, and my mum used to push my son around the town and then come back in the breaks that I had between students so I could feed him and kind of go back and forwards, because it was just something that I was enjoying doing. I picked up a few A-level students who had free periods during the day, and it was really nice to work with them and just use my brain in a different way and feel like I was myself again, really. I always thought I'd go back to teaching, and I didn't think that tuition was a thing. I wish there'd been a group like yours around during that time, because I would have seen that it was possible. But to be honest, if I'm being really honest, I think I was a bit embarrassed. I was embarrassed what people thought of me tutoring. And whenever anybody asked, I'd say, oh, I just do bits, I do bits of examining and bits of tuition. And, I think I was just a bit like, I felt like I just really kind of not made a mistake, but just I mourned that status, and I mourned that life and position and success, I suppose. And when my daughter started school, even though I had students, I still didn't really think of tuition as a viable thing. I arranged to work in a local school. I just sent off some letters to the schools that I wanted to work in, and I had quite a good response to that. And I arranged to work in a local school for 2 days a week. I was really happy. And I still kept some tuition going in the evenings. I'd long since given up when people start to kind of see your CV and say, oh, would you like to do a week's supply or a mat cover? I was a bit like, yeah, this idealized vision of me skipping back into a school and going, oh, yes, you can have this SLT job and you can lead on learning and teaching again. I kind of written that off and come to terms with that. I quite liked going into that school and doing some small group intervention and waltzing in at 8:30 and skipping out at 3:15 felt liberating when I saw how stressed everybody was. It also became clear that teaching maybe in the 6 years that had elapsed, longer than that actually, 6 or 7 years that had elapsed, teaching had become a little bit different. And I did have an insight into that because my husband is also a teacher. And I think we kind of had a bit of an agreement that I think running a family, a happy family, or a kind of a working family, or kind of family that we wanted, isn't all that sustainable when both of you are working in a school. Just kind of managing that. So that's where I was. I didn't do any work in COVID. Wasn't one of these people who kind of raked it in. I just was like, oh, COVID, exams are cancelled. Oh, that's a shame. And there was a panic, but it never, ever occurred to me to pick up some more students. Just didn't happen. I don't know why. It might have been pandemic brain or whatever. But so I just stopped for more or less kind of 18 months. And obviously then things started to pick up, didn't they, afterwards, when everybody had the panic and realised that exams were actually probably going to happen, and things like that. So things did become, did get a few more inquiries. And then in February 2021, an agent contacted me completely out of the blue about working with a student in China. And the message seemed a bit weird. It wasn't the kind of message that I'd usually get. I was a little bit suspicious. I just thought, what is this? Like, is this a thing? Like, it just seemed a bit odd. But my New Year's resolution that year was to say yes. I'm naturally quite cautious, but I was like, this is the year. I'm just going to say yes to everything. So I said yes. And I agreed to a call with them. And I agreed to it. I don't think old Jane would have. But I pushed myself and said yes, and what can I say? That call completely changed my life. And within 18 months, I've now got a full timetable of students. I work with around 20 students now, 10 a.m. till 2 p.m, 4 days a week. Drop my days at school. And do online tuition for students in China, Singapore, and Hong Kong. And as I got to know my ideal client and became aware of the industry and the market of international kind of students, I kind of started to understand how it works and how to find them, so that I didn't have to solely rely on the agent. So I've begun to pick up some privately. It's about a quarter of my own private students, compared to about 3/4 from the agent.
That's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, and to think that I nearly turned that down is terrifying. It has completely changed my life. It's completely changed our family life. I don't work evenings anymore. I'm down to one kind of Tuesday evening, but I'm phasing that out gradually with the intention of just seeing through my commitments to the existing students that I have, and not replacing them. As my family grows, I want to be around in the evenings because the kids are at school now. And that was all kind of ticking along. Now, what I'm going to say next is probably going to be a bit bonkers, because I then had a conversation with my sister-in-law around this time last year, and she runs her own marketing agency. And we were kind of at a family gathering and just having general conversation, and she just sat me down and in casual conversation, changed my life again. She told me I was running a business, and it seems bonkers that I didn't realize this until this point. And I think this is where kind of mindset comes in. I just hadn't seen myself as somebody who was running a business. It was still a side hustle. It was still something I was just doing until I sorted my life out and got back in the classroom. I was a pit pony. I was maybe free range pit, but I was still a pit pony.
Yeah.
And that conversation, I didn't sleep that night because I was just poring over just the casual suggestions that she'd made, because obviously she's got her own business, she's a marketing expert, and just opened up this other world to me. And now, as a consequence, 1 year later, I'm starting to be a lot more strategic with how I'm thinking. I'm trying to start building the foundations for a more long-term future with tuition at the center of that. I've realised through your group, through the Q&A with Sharon Corley, and just speaking to all of the members in that group, that tuition isn't something that I'm embarrassed about anymore. It is a viable career, and it is something that I'm incredibly proud of. And now, on my admin day, I work at a co-working space, and it looks out onto the library where I first started. And I know that this is where I'm meant to be. I feel like I'm finally owning my decision to walk away. And I now understand what my friend meant when she sent me a meme when I first left teaching. And it said, throw away your brilliant career and start living.
Wow, like honestly, literal goosebumps. Then there's something about like things going full circle.
Mhm.
Like even just sitting in a working
Mhm.
space overlooking the place
Yeah,
where it all started. There's something
yeah,
quite magical about that.
yeah,
There was a few times there where it actually made me quite emotional. Can we just go back a little bit?
yeah.
um, Mentors,
Mhm.
and I've put around this in my notes because I scribble notes down all the time. Um, Strong leadership.
Mhm.
So it's not just about having mentors, it's having this and being connected and being close to people who are one passionate, which comes through in what you're saying. Every single word you're saying is so much passion about your career in teaching and then
Mhm.
into your business as well. And even when you had like the mindset, which it wasn't a business, just a side hustle,
Mhm.
there's still passion there. There's like
Mhm.
this drive that underpins everything. Is that just from, or do you believe that is just from having those mentors and those strong, I suppose, role models, particularly in your early career? Do you think that's where it comes from?
Yes, and I think, obviously when you're invited to do something like this, which, I've never done before, it's way out of my
Mm.
comfort zone, but I started to think and just reflect, and you know, I always thought I was very lucky, and yes, I am. I am lucky to have just fallen on my feet, and there is a real element of being at the right place at the right time, but I think
Yeah,
it's also about taking opportunities,
yeah,
because you know there were colleagues that I worked with in that first school that didn't take those opportunities, and they didn't get the same returns. You know, they didn't see the value in working with those people, maybe, or they didn't squeeze every last drop of information from them. But I think I've always been quite reflective. I've always been quite driven. I've always wanted to improve. And you know, I think I think just knowing firsthand the power of education
mm,
and what it can do for you really spurred me on, not just for students but also for myself. Like, I think I'm naturally curious, and I naturally have like this pursuit of restless excellence.
mm,
We kind of talked about that a lot,
yeah,
as leaders, like just not always wanting to strive to improve. And it seems counterintuitive to say, oh, I worked at this challenging school and now I'm working with very, very high achieving students.
mm,
These students are interested in, have a really clear focus on the top grades, the top independent schools in the
yeah,
UK. And it seems counterintuitive to say working at a challenging special measures school has helped me to work with these high achieving, in students that go to some of the top independent schools in the UK. But I really do think that, because it's the same skill, it's the same focus on getting the results. It's the same focus of translating assessment objectives.
mm,
It's the same focus on kind of excellence that you would have for any student, regardless of their circumstances or regardless of their social kind of position. And I do strongly feel that it is for everybody.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, mate. I mean, I agree 100%. I agree 100% with it. There's nothing. I don't think anybody could disagree. It doesn't, and we know that education is the pathway for into a better life of some sort. And I just think that passion for that at the heart of everything you do,
yeah.
which should be the passion of what all tutors really hold dear. That is
Mhm.
making sure that we take a child, no matter where they're from
Mhm.
point A to point B. And point A to
Yes.
point B can be different stages for
Mhm.
everybody. But yeah,
Mhm.
totally. The other thing I had underneath here was trust. It seems like you were given a lot of trust, and that was an underpinning effect of, or the effect of that underpinned that you was able to then sort of go to places
quite literally, like Chicago, but also like in your mind, like you can push yourself from that.
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah, which is a bit strange, I think, because I think after all that ended, or maybe before then actually, because I think when you're under that much pressure, like you're only as good as your last set of results.
yeah.
So you're always kind of, not imposter syndrome, but thinking, oh God, I did it last year and I need to do it again, but better. And it's that, you do question yourself, but when you do it repeatedly over time, you kind of have to start thinking, well, maybe I'm all right at this.
Yeah.
But I think that confidence definitely dipped after I kind of walked away from everything.
So that
And
kind
and tuition gave me that back, because once I worked with that first set of students, and then they contacted me on results day and were like, oh, thanks, I got this, and I got full marks on a paper, and I was like, oh my God, like that's amazing. Like I was like, obviously you're pleased for them, but I needed that validation as well for me. And that was why it was important, just to kind of keep my hand in and just reclaim a bit of me again, I think.
I mean, the other thing, the bit that actually made me get quite emotional was the bit where you start talking about that sense of self and sense of loss. I don't know whether you listened to a podcast, it was about 3 months ago, with a grief specialist.
Yes.
And we spoke, and I didn't push her hard enough on this question, because we need to do a part 2 basically, because I was like, look, I really want to talk about leaving something behind that you truly believed in and that you wrap your identity in, because that's what I felt when I left teaching. It was like, I don't quite know who I am. If I'm not a teacher anymore, don't quite know what's left. And there's 2 sides of the coin for you, and I think this is particularly for women who have families, right? Go off and leave their teaching career behind. They're left with a really harsh choice. And we were off camera just talking about, in general, I was quite drawn when I was looking for business support. I was quite drawn into the people who were actually just supporting women, because most of the inspirational leaders in my life have always been women. I know what I can think of one off the top of my head, a male leader who was inspirational. The rest, and there's a few of them in my life, will be women, because that's pretty much my public services, social services. I started in parent and toddler groups and Sure Start and Home Start, those kind of things. So there's pretty much, I was the only fella in those kind of teams.
Yeah.
So in a way, I feel quite lucky myself, in the same way you feel lucky around that. And there are actually things that mirrors. Like I was really lucky to be sat in the same offices as these people. They didn't put themselves in offices on their own. So it meant like when I was sat on the phone chatting to a family, or they'd be watching over and we put the phone down and I'd go, how did that go? Or they would go, oh, I heard you say this. Do you know what? Could that have been better? Could it have been like this? Is there, what else? There was always that, what else could we be doing type of approach. But that sense of self and that sense of loss that kind of gets wrapped up into there versus your career, because your career at that point, it's probably taking you down some kind of super head type pathway, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you agree?
A lot of my ex-colleagues are there now. That's where they are. And that was, probably the expectation for me as well.
Because your climb's fast, isn't it? That's and also then your impact. It impacts way more children, doesn't it? That's kind of the point, isn't it? You go up so you can affect more people. So like leaving that behind as a conscious choice, like you say, you wasn't jaded with it. You were ready for that next stage, wherever you're going to go. But actually there was at the deep down value of, do you know what? My family values are this versus what I'm going to achieve in school. That must have been quite a harsh decision to make.
It felt very easy at the time. Yeah, it just felt right. It did feel right. I think it was later. I mean, when you've just had a baby, you don't know what on earth you're doing, do you? But it did feel right. I know that it was the right decision. It was maybe kind of after I'd had my daughter. So that was kind of 2 to 3 years, or 2 years. And then that year I was like, do you know what? This is kind of hitting me now. This is who I am. I've had my son. did a bit of messing around with tuition and then had my daughter, and I was like, well, this is it now. Like, I'm not going to go back and get a job and, you know, be the person that I was. But I didn't want to be that person, because I know that what price I would have had to pay. And I think I posted quite recently in the group, and I knew at this moment that I turned a corner. And a lot of this is down to the recent training that you've done, that I'd set myself up on LinkedIn, and an ex-colleague who I respected enormously, had a real input in my career, had viewed my profile, and I wasn't ashamed. I think I felt like really empowered by that decision, and that I'd made it work, and that, do you know what? I know that you wouldn't agree with that, but I'm owning this because I get to do, you know, I've gained a lot. And I think that it was that shift of, I haven't lost anything anymore. I've gained it. I get to take my children to school every day. I get to pick them up every day. I get to be present with my family. I get to do bedtimes. You know, I mean, maybe that would be a bit of a benefit, not having to do bedtimes sometimes, but, you know, I get to do all of those things. And I think that that's, you know, the work that you've done in the group it has really helped me. And I think that that was a kind of real pivotal moment for me, where I was like, do you know what? I'm over this. Like, I've got it. I'm doing it. And, you know, I'm making a success of it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. No. And it's given me more than I felt that it had taken away.
Well, there was a question I put around the sense of self and sense of loss, and I put the word status with a question mark, but I think it's more than that. The question is, like, that's that sense of self that you lost, and that sense of loss, that grieving and mourning, as you put it, has that allowed for the growth, this next part? Like, had you not gone through that, what would it have been like now, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing. That's something which I know I've worked through. Like, was that meant to happen so that I could be this person today?
Yeah.
Whereas, let's just say 6 years. How old's your son?
He's 9. He's 10 in November.
Oh,
you know. So actually now I've been tutoring for longer than, or just coming up to probably tutoring as long as I was a teacher.
Wow.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
You know.
Time goes. Yeah. Let's not give away ages, Jane.
Yeah.
I think like where I was going with that is the whole, let's say that didn't happen. Let's say like you didn't have your children. Like, would you have grown as much? Where would you have been in terms of like your mental health, maybe? And where is it burnout? Is it, or perhaps it was going to be a roaring success, you know, super head into whatever, like change next. I know it's kind of hypotheticals and we'll never know, but sometimes you shake something off, like the sense of loss, and then it allows you to grow into something that you're even bigger and better than it was before. Although it sounds like the acceptance of that was tricky to begin with.
Yeah, it was, but I think I'm ready for it now. You know, I'm ready, and I think you're right. I had to go through that because now that is driving me. It's like, tuition is nothing to be embarrassed about, and I'm going to show everybody that it's not, because I'm going to drive myself forward and I'm going to make this a success. And I'm really excited, you know. It's a really exciting time.
I'm really excited for you. I mean, we've spoken before, and I always come off calls like that, excited. But I think with what you've managed to do in such a short space of time, particularly with saying yes to the overseas tutoring, which is, we'll dig a bit into that now. Like, it is just so exciting. So you're at this stage now where you're being more strategic with your business. You feel like you've got that mindset on in the right place. What's the next step? Where are you going next?
Well, I've been suffering massively with shiny object syndrome. I do need to focus. I have a meeting next week about service level agreements to see if I can expand that way, and seeing if I can kind of do that. I'm also, you know, I want to kind of pay it back. I would love to get involved with coaching tutors, whatever stage of their journey they're at. I've been fortunate, as I've kind of explained this evening, about how I've been supported and helped. And I think throughout all of that, you know, when I was leading my own department, my kind of tagline was like challenge, support, enable. And that was for everything, because I really feel like I've enjoyed that from others. And I hope that I gave that to other people in my kind of role as a teacher in the traditional teaching kind of perspective. But I think I want to expand that now and help other tutors. It's a real passion. I think it's a really powerful thing. And just because I think if I'd had that, you know, my journey would have been completely different. It would have been much more rapid. You know, I mean, the fact that I've only felt like I've been running a business for 12 months is, you know, it's crazy. And I think, you know, I get a lot of messages from people and like asking for advice. And the biggest thing that I would say is that it just takes time. Everybody's at a different stage, and you just can't compare yourself to others. Like the group that you have is amazing. It's so diverse. And I think people starting out need to recognize that nobody's been an overnight success. And hopefully your podcasts are kind of proving that. You know, my tuition journey has been going on for, you know, 9 years now. And it's only now that I'm realizing I have a business. You know, people in your group are so lucky to have that mindset from the beginning, because I think if I'd had that, my journey would have been completely different, you know. And had it not been just for that chance conversation with my sister-in-law, because one of the biggest things that she told me was you need to surround yourself with other business people. And that, since I've started doing that, a whole new world has opened up for me.
It just changes perspective, doesn't it? Just completely changes it. I'm really jealous because you went to Atomicon.
Yes, it was amazing.
I'm so jealous, right? Because I think it was about a week before, there was a guy who became a headline speaker last minute. And so,
yes, Christo.
And I followed him for so long. Oh, I'm absolutely gutted I couldn't make it work.
It's even worse that you recommended that I go as well.
I know. I'm glad you went, because it's one of those. What I've booked next year. It's one of those things where you go and it's right on your doorstep.
Yeah.
Whereas I've got to travel like, it feels like 4 days to get there for me. It's not, but it feels it.
It will be worth it, Richard. It's not grim up north, you know. It's not. It's beautiful.
Well, I've booked out 3 days, so two of those days to travel. But I will. I'm definitely committing to it. It's just one of those where I'm actually writing a podcast at the moment about this topic in particular. Not about any event, but just the fact that you should surround yourself with people who give you energy, and you have to start cutting out the people who don't. And it doesn't mean that you cut friends out. What you do is you just reduce the time, but also it's very specific. So like for example, when you're with those people who are perhaps like you feel drained, like people you love, but people who perhaps like just take, we all know people like this who because you are I don't know, a success, because you are just have that personality where you're easy to talk to. So they do it, right? They kind of just they take and don't give a lot back in. And that's fine. You know, you keep your guard up and you contain and you give things back in the way that you do. But then you need to go and get energy from other people who will celebrate in your successes, and not just celebrating your successes. They can share theirs as well. And by sharing their successes, you are gaining knowledge. And it's just like this big cycle of positivity most of the time, where you're just learning from each other. And like things like Atomicon, things like the Connexus stuff, the Connexus tutoring event that's happening in September. Like the speakers and the workshops are almost like the added value to the event.
Yes.
Compared to just sat down at lunch, chatting and meeting other tutors, sitting next to people, listening to the workshops and the speakers talk. Like that's where you get your energy from, and they're just worth every penny, to the point where last week I nearly booked into something else, but I actually cannot make. I can only make one of this 3-day event in Brighton. I can only.
I've seen that one. Yeah, I was like, oh, that's a bit far for me.
See, that's like the opposite side. That's an hour journey for me. But it's 3 days, really good value for money. But I could only attend one of them. I've just got commitments on the other 2 days. But that's another one in the future. I'll go, that is one that I would definitely put in the diary, because again, because of the energy, and it's quite close. But it's those sorts of things we need to be doing, and we need to surround ourselves with people who are going to give us this energy, which is why this group exists, why the group on Facebook exists in the first place. Because I came home from an event and was like, my God, I don't have a group for tutors. I can't go in. There were things like the Twinkle private tutors group, and there was things like, which is very much, and the people do ask questions in there, but very much it's more about resources, and it wasn't like a specific place. And I just felt like there was something needed. Just it felt like there was a gap in there where we could go in and say, do you know what, let's just be here for one another. And coming back from one of those a separate course or conference I went to, I was like, actually, do you know what, if I build this thing in public and make it like, this is what I'm doing, be as open as I can and give value where I can, I think there's room for a course for people so they can learn. Even short workshops is where it really started. And that's where it's built from there. So I know that we need to help one another, and we need to share these tips, and we need to make sure that people coming into the industry feel like there's a place to go. And whether that is like something like the 8-week course that's happening soon, or one-off workshops that will happen throughout the year, or and I know like we've spoken before about even looking at the international market and sharing some top tips of how people can sort of break into the market, or at least make it something if part of their strategy or business plan. So watch out for that, people, because that's going to happen soon. After we finish recording this, actually, I'm going to bend Jane's ear about it a little bit more. We're going to make that happen real soon. So there's just so many different ways that we can create a space for tutors to feel more confident about themselves, take that shift from becoming like this side hustle that we do because we perhaps need to pay off a debt, or perhaps we need to just have some money coming in, or we're still mourning the loss of our job or leaving the teaching profession. That's fine. But there will come a point where you go, like you did, Jane, like I did, this is a business. You flick the switch, and then it changes everything. So it's all about. So Jane, I feel like we've covered so much, and I don't know why it actually got me so emotional when you was talking about it. I think because maybe like I left in different circumstances, and I really felt that sense of loss. So when you talk about it, I really empathize with that. In a similar way that when you started talking about that making the choice between your family, and I know it was an easy choice, and it should be an easy choice. I know it's not an easy choice for everybody, but we should really be putting our families first. But that's not always the message we get from education. I did put down something about, is that something that's changed in education since you left? Because you said there was like 6 or 7 years, then you went back in again and you saw there was a change. I'm just wondering if that's kind of a message that's kind of been lost over time. But also, like, I talk a lot about Lisa Johnson's course that I did quite a few years ago now. And she still talks about how it's so hard for women to be business leaders and still don't get the recognition. It's almost like, oh, how's your little business getting on? And I feel like that's like, I'm really passionate about this myself, like, because I know that I'm always drawn. I'm always like, oh, are men allowed in this membership, or can I join that course? Because I know that's the sort of people I want to learn from. And so I don't understand, because I'm literally sitting there as a British white male, like, with everything that comes along with that, the things that I don't understand. So I will always be a champion. You're saying at the start about, you're feminist, and really believe in that myself. So how do we?
I think it's a really sad situation where people have to make that choice in some ways. This idea that you can have it all, and I really want to believe that, but that's a different conversation completely. But
maybe
it is. I think it's just really hard. It is hard.
But then I've seen the thing that I've seen myself in school with who I see, there's one in mind in particular who was such a fantastic teacher, who is a fantastic teacher, and SLT, she just started sort of getting into leadership. She got married, she had children, so went like maternity leave and came back part-time, and then hasn't been able to get back into it. And I feel like that's such a harsh thing to happen when you knew it was there, and then you kind of make this choice because you want to start another phase of your life because it feels the right thing to do and it is the right thing to do. And then something, maybe your actual career path either stumbles or stalls just because of that. I feel that's really unfair. So if there was somebody at that stage now, and this is kind of like a kind of my usual question is, what advice would you give to someone starting now? But I'm gonna like up this level for you because you've gone there. So sorry, Jay. If there's somebody now who's kind of maybe even thinking about tuition, but it's at that stage where they're thinking about starting a family as well, and they're kind of at this kind of crossroads, what would your advice be to them? What would you kind of advise them to do?
So I think you've got to be realistic about what you can and can't do, and you can't put too much pressure on yourself. I think if you were just starting out, I'd maybe suggest diversifying as much as you can. The examining for me was a massive thing. I know that not everybody has the kind of luxury of that, but the exam work that I did, I'm marked for anything, basically anything. And that's actually helped a lot in kind of the kind of business model that I'm operating now.
Yeah.
I think, because I did have a message the other week about this, how do you manage childcare and evenings? And, because I think you have to be realistic. These things do take time and you will be working a lot of evenings. I was lucky to have a lot of support from my family, from my husband, my parents, to kind of facilitate that for me. But I didn't go mad. I had like 4 or 5 students when my children were young. There was no point in me walking out of the job that I had to spend time with my family and then just fill it up with tuition. But I think it depends a lot on your personal circumstances, really, and is it a viable kind of option for you to step back? I know not everybody has that luxury, but I definitely would look at options that help. I would probably suggest online because you're not traveling unless you want to get out of the house, which I completely understand because that's what I did. Probably, do face-to-face, get out of the house, have a kind of day out. Work in schools possibly is an option. Don't feel funny about sending out letters to people and kind of your CV, and they're crying out for quality intervention. The money's there. They've been given a pot of money for it. NTP tuition is great. I started off doing some for an NTP provider, did it online. It was good, it ticked the box. I got paid for it. It wasn't particularly brilliant, but it did the job. I think what I would say is that, listen to my story, but look at the journey. Don't just see the end result. I think when I've posted before, it's, oh my gosh, how do you get international students? And I'll have like a million DMs in my inbox, like, how do you break into this market? It's not like that. You need to build up to this thing. When I was at Atomicon, Joe Wicks did a talk and he talked about being a 10-year overnight success. And that is so true. And one of your podcast guests, Gemma Zoe Smith, was saying that, yes, on the outside, it looks like these things have happened very rapidly. And yes, it did, in the last kind of 18 months, things have really kind of upped for me, but you've kind of paid your dues. And I think, just to go back to my teaching journey as well, I didn't get promoted until I took my director of faculty job, because I knew that I wanted to be the best teacher that I could. I didn't chase promotions. I got one, heading up Key Stage 4 English, but I didn't I never searched for it because I knew that I needed to hone my craft. I wasn't kind of over promoted too
Yeah.
rapid, even though it happened quickly, and it did towards the end. It was all, very focused, and you have to make sure that you've got the basics in place before you can enjoy the fruits of it. I don't know if that answered your question, but I
it's
just
really good
like
advice. Yeah.
be realistic. You have to be realistic. You're not going to go from zero to being fully booked. Like, you have to figure out what works, make mistakes, and kind of work out what your USP is, like, who are you? Who do you want to specialize in? And you're not going to know that until you've made mistakes. You're not going to know that until you've kind of dealt with a range of different clients, or what you want to specialize in. What do you enjoy? There's no point doing this and creating a job for yourself if you're not going to enjoy it.
There's a lot there, Jane, because you're even talking about mistakes and then that enjoyment.
Yeah.
I mean, all of those things. We need to embrace the mistakes, and they're hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really tough to do that, and it's particularly in a world where mistakes can be seen as fatal. In education, when you make a mistake, someone's jumped on you straight away. And yet so it's not like that when you run a business. Often mistakes are not fatal at all. They're actually, once you get the right mindset, they're really important.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah,
absolutely.
Lots of good advice in there. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I've just been awestruck the whole way through, if I'm honest. I've barely asked the question, which is like really odd for a podcast. But thank you for also referencing Gemma Zoe Smith, because I was about to do that, this overnight success thing. And there's a common theme coming through from the successful tutors. I don't know how many I've interviewed now. Numbers are creeping up. But there's definitely a common theme, and that is time matters. Yeah. Time matters a lot. And the amount of consistency required for you to get to the point where you can reflect back and go, oh my goodness, this is now a fully fledged business. And it will look like, you say, overnight. It's not. When you go back and you start picking apart the skill sets that you have, the amazing people you've learned from, that underpin everything's now embedded in your just general approach to your business and to your tutoring services. Suddenly you realize that, oh, right, it's not just me putting out a post on Facebook 3 times a week. It's way more than that.
Yeah.
So that in itself is just such a good way to end. So thank you. I've really appreciated your time. It's been an absolute blast. I've learned a lot about your journey, stuff that I didn't realize before, but it's just been amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
And we'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.